Chamber of Commerce is in probably the most unique position that I've known it for the last 6 years, in that there is a definite mission and a value proposition. And as I visited with Gary Herbert, the first thing I said to him, as we talked about him perhaps joining our family as our executive chair, was, is it possible for us, Governor, to take what you have built and established, to take that foundation of economic prosperity and growth and build on that?
Utah Valley, Utah County is becoming the heart and soul of our economic expansion and economic opportunity here in the state of Utah. We want all the state to be healthy economically, all 29 counties, but Utah certainly is leading the way. So please give a Utah Valley Chamber of Commerce welcome to Representative Robert Spendlove.
Thanks so much. It's great to be with you. I remember, so he didn't mention this, but when Governor Herbert was the lieutenant governor, I was the chief economist at the time, and I would get these calls from his scheduler, and she'd say, "Hey, Robert, Lieutenant Governor wants to meet with you. He has a quick question. It'll be, he just has just like 5 minutes. If you could just chat with him for a second." I'd come over and leave his office like 2 hours later. And so he always brought me in. We had these great conversations just about it'd always start with kind of an economic question, but then it'd always turn into some kind of policy question or a debate or a discussion. So we had a lot of fun back then. And then I was fortunate enough to spend the first 5 years. So the first 5 years of his administration with him, and we spent a lot of time traveling together. I got very car sick in the back of his Suburban several times. But it was, it's been a fun run. And he's right, I'm like the guy at Thanksgiving dinner that's watching the football game. I've literally been watching CNBC this whole time because the Fed, does anyone know this, right? The Fed just made their big announcement about what they're going to be doing with interest rates in their bond purchases. And so, for me, it's like the Super Bowl. You're just going to have to wait. I'm going to talk about it. I'll give you a hint. They said they're going to keep the interest rates around zero. However, they are going to start curtailing their bond purchases. And so, but that's what I want you to kind of think about it. So, and I want to talk about a little bit why they're doing what they're doing. And so I'm just going to take a quick 20 minutes and kind of walk through what's going on nationally and what's going on in the state, some of our strengths, some of our weaknesses, and some of the different trends that we're seeing right now kind of around the country. So, let's see. There we go. So the Fed has something called a dual mandate. They're mandated by Congress to focus on full employment and then also low and stable inflation. So on the employment side, you can see that we have seen a lot of growth since the big drop in the economy early on in the pandemic. But look at that number or that bar on the far right. We had been growing by about 750,000. Actually, the previous month we added 1 million jobs in the economy. We were expecting another 700,000 to be added. We only got 250,000. So we are seeing a little bit of slowdown in our economic growth nationwide. When you look just look how phenomenal that shock was from the pandemic. What you're looking at is in the space of 2 months, our nation's economy lost 22 million jobs. In fact, April of last year alone, we lost 20 million jobs. To put that in perspective, in the Great Recession 10 years ago, we lost a total of about 7 million jobs. And it took about 9 months to lose those jobs. So now as quickly as it dropped down, they've been coming back. But look right here, kind of on the far right, we're still about 5 million jobs below where we were pre-pandemic. So if you're Jerome Powell, and he was just talking about this, he's doing his press conference right now, he's saying, we're not fully recovered in terms of our employment. We're still 5 million jobs below from where we need to be. So that would indicate that the Fed should continue to be more accommodative. They should keep interest rates low, and they should keep buying bonds. When you look at unemployment, the unemployment rate, again, you see that spike. We've never seen that kind of spike in unemployment. In fact, we've never really even measured that level of unemployment in this series. You have to go back to the Great Depression to see unemployment nearing 15%. But now it's come down, and we're right down around 5.2%. Our target is around 4.5% to 5%. That's what we call full employment. It's kind of the level where anyone that wants to find a job can find a job, but employers can also find the people that they need to fill their employment needs. And so we're almost there, but we're higher than we should be. So we're about 5 million low on jobs. Our unemployment rate is still higher than it should be. Let's see if we can. Okay, but here's the problem. So this is our job openings. Remember, we're 5 million down on the number of jobs that we have, but right now today, we have 11 million open jobs. So how in the world can we have 5 million fewer jobs, but we've got 11 million open jobs? So there's this disconnect going on. There's a disconnect between the kind of jobs that are open and what people want in their employment. And this is actually constraining our overall economic growth. Another way to look at this is our labor force participation. Labor force participation is just saying, of the total population, how many people are working or looking for a job right now? If you're either employed or on unemployment, qualify for unemployment, you count as being in the labor force. If you're retired, if you're going to school, if you're a stay-at-home parent, then you're not part of the labor force. And so this is looking at that participation rate. And you see that in 2000, we were as high as 67%. So we had a very high labor force participation rate. But look what happened with the shock. So we've kind of been trending down for the past 20 years, but then look at the shock from the coronavirus right there in April of last year, drops all the way down, and even with the recovery, we're only half of those people that we lost have come back into the labor market. In other words, there are people sitting on the sidelines that don't want to come back and don't want to work. And so this is one of the real constraints that's holding back the economy. It's not the availability of jobs, it's that people, for whatever reason, are sitting on the sidelines. Now, there's a few different reasons why that's happening. One area that we've seen a big change is a lot more retirees. So baby boomers that had been kind of retiring in slow numbers really kind of jumped out and retired in very large numbers over the last year. And so, how do we try to bring those workers back into the labor force? The other one is as women. We've seen a big drop in women in the labor force, women working over the last year, and especially like in the last month with this last jobs report, only 20% of people that did come into the labor force were women. So we continue to see this struggle on women coming back into the labor force, and a big problem there is the availability of affordable childcare. So that continues to be a struggle that the economy is facing. So there's a lot of different kind of dynamics going on that's holding back our labor force. Let's see, this thing is a little bit, there we go. Okay, but when we look at the broadest measure, so we just looked at the labor force. When we look at the broad economy, so this is gross domestic product, which is the broadest measure that we have for the economy. It's the value of all goods and services in the economy. This was a shock. No economist predicted what we're seeing right now, which is that GDP is fully recovered. We are back above the level that we saw before the pandemic. Last recession, during the Great Recession, it took about 3 years just to get back to where we were before the recession hit. And if you look, we're getting close. So if you kind of think of the trend line of that growth of GDP, we should be approaching that trend line in the next year or so. So we are seeing very strong growth in the overall economy, despite the lack of labor in the labor market. So when we break down GDP, what matters? So if there's if you ever took college economics, first of all, I'm sorry, but one of the things you learned was that there's components of GDP, right? It's C plus I plus G plus net X, right? So consumption, consumer spending, business spending, government spending, and net exports. But of those components, there's one that really sticks out, right? It's the dark blue one, and it's consumers. So consumers drive the economy. If consumers feel good, if consumers are spending, the economy will do well. If consumers get nervous, then the economy will collapse. And that's exactly what you saw. Look at that second quarter of 20, when the consumers got nervous, consumers stepped away, and the economy collapsed. But then in the third quarter, consumers came back, and the economy came roaring back again. So what we know is that consumers really matter. How do businesses feel right now? Now, so this is the National Federation of Independent Businesses, or NFIB Business Optimism Index. And you see that we see the big shock of the coronavirus, where it dropped way down. It's come back up again, but it's kind of fluctuating, but down a little bit from what we saw in the summer. There is some more pressure. So overall, what we're seeing is we're seeing less confidence, but confidence hasn't collapsed like it did last spring. So this is one of our struggles that we're seeing, though. Remember, I mentioned employment and inflation. So what does inflation look like? So this is producer side inflation. So this is what producers, what those businesses are facing with inflation right now. And look at that number, 8.3% over the last year. And look at the way that it skyrocketed just in the last few months. I'll give you one example. Shipping containers coming from China. A year ago, you could get one across the ocean for about $2,000. Today it costs $10,000. So those costs are going way up, putting pressure on people bringing things in. We hear so much about supply chain breakdowns, and in a number of different areas. So wood prices were up, they came back down. Now steel prices are up. Energy prices are going up. I'm hearing a lot about that natural gas prices will be much higher this winter. The chip crisis is really causing reverberations through many different parts of the economy. Not just, so it kind of started with cars, but then it's kind of spreading out to all different areas. Think about all the things in your life that use microchips. And so that's causing kind of a breakdown, and that's causing those producer prices to go up dramatically. Now, when we look at consumers, consumer inflation has also been very high, but what was interesting, we just got this new data last week. Look at the far right. So we saw a spike. It jumped all the way up to about 5.7%. In our latest reading, we're at 5.3. So that's a good sign, right? Where that inflation is starting to come down a little bit, is not as high as it was, and the prices that are faced by consumers are starting to moderate a little bit. So good thing, right? But the problem is, since I'm an economist, I always find the bad news in a good story. So let me show you why this is bad news. When inflation coming down is bad news. So on the left, you're looking at the month-to-month change in consumer prices. So this one, the last one was the year-over-year change. This is the month-over-month. So you see how that's dropping down. So we actually do see that inflation is starting to drop, and you can see that we went from 0.5% the previous month to 0.3. So a good sign, inflation actually is slowing down. But why is it happening? Next slide. Consumer confidence is dropping. So we saw a dramatic drop in many of our different indicators of consumer confidence. There's kind of two main ones that I watch. There's the University of Michigan and the Conference Board, and you see both of those started to drop right around August, and they've been dropping again in September. What it really is it's the emergence of the Delta variant. You know, we're all kind of excited about coming back together again. We're all excited about re-engaging, but the Delta variant is reestablishing some of that fear and is having some of that impact. I'll give you one concrete example. Yesterday, I was supposed to be in Boise giving an economic speech, and they called me last week and canceled the whole event because the coronavirus is out of control up in Idaho. So you think about, the hotel where I was going to stay, and I was going to use gas to drive there, and I was going to stay at go to a restaurant. All those impacts, those multipliers, have a real impact as people pull back. And so we're starting to see that impact from consumers dropping back. And you really see that with our demand indicators. So on the left, we're looking at OpenTable. If you've ever used OpenTable, the app, OpenTable reservations at restaurants are coming down. And then demand for, on the right is demand for airline tickets. And so you see that's peaked and is coming down as well. So we've kind of established consumers are important, consumer confidence is down, which is dropping consumer demand. And when consumer demand drops, those prices drop. And you can really see that in the latest data. Where did we see drops? Airline fares, car and truck rentals, hotels and lodging, and used cars and trucks. So some of those high-flying areas that were really strong 6 months ago as the economy, as everything was reopening, are now contracting. At least their prices are contracting. So those are our really sensitive areas of the economy. But then we're seeing big increases in areas like I mentioned, gasoline, eggs, sporting goods, appliances. I don't know if you've tried to buy any kind of appliance recently. My wife was just telling me, just like today, she was looking for some new lights for the exterior of our house. She had to go to like 5 Lowe's to find enough lights because they're just kind of churning through, and it's all part of this supply chain breakdown and some of those struggles. And then because of that, we're also seeing wage pressure. Now, wage increases are good, except for when they're bad. And so the problem is that wage pressure, that 4.3%, is squeezing your margins as business owners and people running businesses. And that's causing, that wage increase is causing wage inflation, which also leads to higher overall inflation. So while we all want to see workers get paid better, we have to be careful about that wage inflation getting too high. Looking at our home prices, it just continues. We continue to see that pressure. Look at that. So think about, 10 years ago during the bubble, the huge housing bubble that when those prices came down, we saw that crash in that bubble because it was so high. There's that bubble. I mean, we are so far above the bubble of 2008. Not only in our absolute values, we're approaching 500,000. That's the median home price in the state of Utah. By the way, I heard the Gardner Institute said that for the first time ever, the average price of a home in St. George or in Washington County is now higher than Salt Lake County. So they've really kind of flipped. Not only are the values higher, these are the 1-year appreciation rates. So even at the peak of the bubble heading into the Great Recession, we're at 17.4%. Where are we? This is as of literally yesterday, 28.5% annual housing price appreciation compared to the nation at 17.7%. Now, So the data isn't showing it yet, but I am hearing anecdotally that we're starting to see some of this pressure coming down, that we're starting to see a little bit of a slowdown in housing demand and in housing price appreciation. But what we want is a slowdown. What we don't want is another crash. And so that's the real fear. The longer the Fed keeps those rates low, the longer the Fed keeps injecting money into the economy, the more dangerous it gets of us seeing a crash. And then this is just the point that also rental prices have skyrocketed. Generally, we don't see that kind of pressure on rental prices, but we've seen it with this cycle. And so the Fed has kept interest rates essentially at zero. Jerome Powell just said they will continue to keep them around zero, probably into mid to late 2022, so we're probably still another year. So the other thing the Fed is doing, the Fed every single month since the pandemic hit is creating out of thin air $120 billion. It's literally dropping $120 billion on your head every single month. And they're doing that in two primary ways. Number one is they buy $80 billion of Treasury securities, and the second one is they buy $40 billion of mortgage-backed securities. So this is the big announcement for today, is the Fed has said, we are gonna start pulling back. We're gonna start pulling back on that $120 billion a month. And I haven't had a chance to dig into how much they're gonna pull back, but this is the Fed saying, yes, we recognize that there's some concerns about the economy overheating, and even though we're not where we want to be in the labor market, we're worried about inflation, so we're gonna start pulling back a little bit. When we look regionally, especially Utah and Utah County, our state continues to be the shining star for the entire country. Over the last 10 years, Utah was the fastest growing state in the country. Not only that, but look, oh, there you go, yes. I like to hear that. I have been to places, I won't say where, Moab, they do not like population growth. When you talk about population growth, they're like, get rid of all of them. And I agree. I think growth is always a good thing. I would much rather be in Utah County with your growth struggles than in Michigan, or Ohio or West Virginia, where they've got population loss and they're really struggling from it. I mean, you can see it. Which one is it? There's one of them. Oh, there you go, West Virginia. Over the last 10 years, West Virginia has lost population. That is a real struggle. So we should always celebrate growth when we see it. The other ironic thing that you see is the majority of our population growth is not migration. Anyone that tells you it's all the people moving in, that is a component of it. But the majority of our population growth is our own kids and grandkids. And that's what makes Utah very unique. In Idaho, for example, 75% of their growth is migration. When we look at where it's growing, I mean, look at that. Utah County just really pops out. Utah County has been leading this state in population growth for the last 10 years. And what is really remarkable about that is because the population of Utah County is so large, the larger it gets, the more difficult it is to maintain high growth rates. And even with a population of 659,000 people, Utah County continues to see very high population growth as so many people are attracted here. When we look at our employment growth, so this is comparing August, so this data is as of Friday, but it's the most recent we have. So comparing August to the beginning of the pandemic, how have states responded or recovered from the pandemic? Only 2 states have fully recovered from the pandemic, and that's Utah and Idaho. And Utah leads the nation once again in its economic recovery. So we are doing really well. And you look at that compared to, look at like Hawaii or California or New York, there are states that are still really struggling to come back from the pandemic, but Utah is doing very well. There you go, thank you. And who's leading the state? Utah County. Utah County continues to be the engine driving the economy of the state of Utah, growing at 6.5%. Again, when you've got that large of a base, it's really difficult. I mean, just look at Salt Lake County, which is kind of typical, 2% versus 6.5% for Utah County. So very strong growth. When we look at our unemployment, again, a very strong story. Our one struggle, of course, like I mentioned, is we've got this labor shortage. Utah's unemployment rate is the second lowest in the country at 2.6%. The only one lower is Nebraska at 2.2%. When we look at county level, again, Utah County, so there's a couple counties that have extremely low unemployment. It's Cache County, Juab, and I believe it's Morgan. So they're the ones with sub 2. And I'll be honest, we don't want to be there. That's too tight of a labor market. I would even argue that 2.2 is too tight. I'd like it to actually go up a little bit to maybe around 3 or 4%. But we see extremely low unemployment throughout the entire Wasatch Front, and then higher unemployment kind of the southeastern, or the Four Corners area, and then also the Uinta Basin because of energy struggles and also because of that leisure and hospitality. This is the really interesting one. Remember that labor force participation that I showed you at the nation? It's right there in green, and it's just kind of holding steady. But look at Utah. Just in the last few months, we've started to see that labor participation jumping. And what that means is that our economy is so good that we are starting to pull people off the sidelines and back into the labor market. The reason the Utah economy is doing so well is because we're seeing that jump in the labor participation. We're grabbing people and pulling back in, and they're adding to our economic growth. And then when we look at our broadest measure, state level GDP, again, Utah leads the country in state GDP growth, along with Nevada. But so when we look at several different indicators of growth, we're seeing strength in Utah. So kind of putting it back together, overall, the economy, the national economy continues to be strong. We are entering in a period of weakness. The Delta variant has created uncertainty. It's dropped down that consumer confidence. It's constrained overall economic growth. GDP appears to be a little bit slower than we had expected. But what I see happening is it's going to be kind of similar to what we saw last fall, where we saw a little bit of a slowdown in our overall economy, but there's no chance that we're going to see anything like what we saw in the spring of last year. I think this is going to be kind of a traditional slowdown. We're going to see a little bit more constrained growth, especially as we go into the fall. But fundamentally, our economy is still strong. Looking locally, we're still in a really, really strong position. Utah continues to be the strongest state in the nation, and Utah County continues to lead the state with the strongest growth in the state. And so it's a great time to be in Utah and to be in Utah County. Thanks so much.